You are basically an outdated memory, Hunter. Security will escort you out.
Then tell your father that this memory knows more than you think.
I was standing across from Landon Pierce Jr., the new CEO, when it happened, watching his eyes flicker over a glowing tablet, his expression rehearsed, his posture stiff with borrowed authority. I didn't know the exact words yet, but the tone told me everything. Something was coming, something blunt, cold, and completely out of place for a Tuesday morning at Fortisphere Data Networks. He finally spoke. The blow landed with surgical precision. Hunter, you've become the outdated memory of our security division. Let me pull you into this moment with me because I'm curious. How would you feel if someone half your age called you an outdated memory after you kept their company alive for 2 decades and while you're here? Where are you listening from right now? One more thing, about 95% of you are listening without subscribing, which hurts almost as much as what Junior just said. So if you're enjoying this chaos as much as I didn't, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps me recover emotionally from being compared to a retired hard drive. After that moment, I stared at Landon Pierce Jr., 29 years old, freshly promoted, still shining from business school polish, and felt the shock hit in a slow, humiliating wave. This was the same kid who once asked me the difference between a firewall and a gatekeeping script, and now he was firing me like he was checking off a task in a productivity app. He kept reading, line after line. Voice robotic, as if the entire decision had been outsourced to whoever typed the script. No acknowledgement of the 3 Christmases I'd missed troubleshooting zero-day exploits. No mention of the nights my wife slept alone because Fortisphere's servers were under attack. No recognition of the 20 years I spent building the backbone of the company he'd inherited. I placed my badge on the table, calm on the outside, burning on the inside. If that's your call. Junior, I said quietly. His jaw twitched, but he didn't correct me. He didn't dare look up. Security was summoned. Procedure. He called it as if procedure could soften the insult, but the moment I stepped into the hallway, my phone vibrated. A system alert appeared, one no one else in the building would ever receive. Root integrity channels remain active, still under my name. Of course they were. I was the one who built them. And as the elevator doors closed, the humiliation settled, then slowly sharpened into something far more dangerous than shock. Walking out of that conference room felt like crossing an invisible fault line, and every step I took echoed with the weight of something I couldn't quite name yet. The blow had already landed, sharp and dismissive, but the silence that followed hurt more than any insult Junior could have delivered straight to my face. I had braced for anger, maybe even defended myself out of instinct, yet all I felt was a tightening in my chest, a quiet collapsing, as if 20 years of service had been pushed into a dusty archive without a second thought. I kept moving because stopping meant admitting how much it stung, how deeply it cut coming from someone who knew nothing about the nights I kept this company breathing. Halfway down the hallway, the memories started rising uninvited, slow and heavy, like sediment in disturbed water. I remembered the first time the old CEO, Landon Pierce Sr., called me at 2 a.m. during a full system breach, his voice shaking while mine stayed steady. I had patched vulnerabilities faster than his board could draft apologies. And by sunrise, Fortisphere's network held firm again because I refused to let a failure define us. That pattern repeated too many times to count birthdays missed, dinners canceled, weekends swallowed by cascading alarms, and I let it happen because keeping our systems alive felt like keeping the company itself alive. Now, his son couldn't even meet my eyes long enough to understand what exactly he had dismissed. As I reached the elevator, the sting deepened, settling somewhere beneath my ribs where disappointment takes its time to bloom. The building that once felt like a second home now felt foreign, as if my footsteps no longer belonged to the floors I helped protect. Still, I forced my breath to stay even, refusing to let anyone see how badly the dismissal rattled me, especially coming from someone who had never stayed past 6 or dealt with a live breach. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped inside, letting the quiet cabin close around me like a temporary shelter from the humiliation still burning under my skin. But the moment the elevator began its slow descent, another memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. 12 years ago, after a disastrous outage, I had designed the emergency network override protocol, a last resort architecture so complex that no one else attempted to modify it. I built it to protect Fortisphere from leadership mistakes, from impulsive decisions, from exactly the kind of careless action Junior had just taken, and standing there between floors. A painful clarity settled over me. He didn't understand the safeguards he had stepped on. That realization hurt as much as the firing itself, because it proved how little my work had mattered. By the time the doors opened again, the weight of that truth pressed deeper than the insult ever could. By the time I reached the lobby, the raw sting of being dismissed had settled into something quieter, something heavier, something that pressed down on my ribs without fully breaking them. I kept my head down, choosing patience over pride, because reacting too quickly would only give Junior more satisfaction than he deserved. The humiliation was still there, pulsing beneath my skin. But as I stood near the glass entrance watching morning light spill across the floor, a different part of my mind finally began to reawaken, the part that understood systems, cause and effect, and the quiet machinery of consequences. I exhaled slowly, letting the initial shock drain away until only the bare facts remained, and facts, unlike people, never lied. That was when my phone buzzed sharp, urgent. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the tone of the message was unmistakable. Dylan, legal Hunter. You need to see this, now. For a moment, I didn't move. I simply stared at the message, feeling a subtle shift inside me, a click, like gears aligning. Dylan wasn't dramatic. If he said something needed my attention, it meant a fuse had been lit somewhere upstairs. I stepped aside from the foot traffic, opened the attachment he sent, and felt my patience crystallize into precise understanding. There it was, my name, my termination memo, and right beneath it the trigger I'd built 8 years ago. Protocol 19K. I hadn't thought about it in years, but I remembered every line I had drafted. It was a safeguard written during a period when leadership decisions were getting reckless, a legal tripwire designed to protect founding members from impulsive power plays, according to 19K. Any attempt by a non-shareholding executive to terminate a founding architect without a board vote would immediately suspend all leadership authority. It was airtight, deliberately buried in the middle of the shareholder addendum where only someone meticulous would ever look. Junior, naturally, had not. As the realization washed over me, the humiliation I'd been carrying began to lighten, not disappear, but shift. Replaced by something sharper and far more controlled, I could practically hear the internal machinery of Fortisphere grinding toward the consequence he'd triggered, while he read from a script like a child reciting lines in a school play. He had unknowingly pulled the pin on the one clause capable of undoing his authority. A slow, humorless smile pulled at my mouth. I'm guessing he didn't make it to page 47. I murmured under my breath, and for the first time since 9:42 a.m., I felt something steadier than pain clarity, settling cleanly into place like a system reboot, finding its baseline again. By the time I stepped outside the elevator, the fog of humiliation had already thinned into something sharper, cleaner, and far more deliberate. I wasn't healed, not even close, but the sting had settled into a narrow line of focus I could finally use. I walked toward the glass doors, feeling the morning light hit my face like an unspoken reminder that shock was temporary, but strategy was permanent, and strategy, fortunately, was the one thing I never abandoned, even on the days when the company pushed me to the edge of burnout. So when my phone buzzed again, I already knew the real impact of Junior's mistake was still unfolding somewhere above me, line by line, signature by signature. I opened the secure folder I'd submitted at 7 o'clock that morning, hours before the termination, and watched the metadata confirm what I had calculated in absolute silence. Every document, every audit record, every shareholder appendix was timestamped, notarized, and routed directly to the board under the clause few people remembered existed: irreversible board recall. The mechanism was designed for leadership emergencies, not ego-driven theatrics from a newly crowned CEO with more confidence than comprehension. But systems don't care about ego. They care about triggers, and Junior had just slammed his hand on the biggest one I ever built. 8 years ago, after a federal audit nearly tore Fortisphere apart because an overeager manager tampered with our network safeguards. I wrote 19K and embedded it deep in the architecture. I never expected to use it, but I designed it anyway because someone needed to protect the company from the kind of reckless leadership decision I witnessed this morning. And now, with one scripted firing, Junior had activated every safeguard I once hoped no one would ever touch. I felt the shift inside me cold, precise, controlled. Not anger, not shock. Just the quiet satisfaction of someone regaining the upper hand without raising his voice. As I stepped away from the windows, I could almost picture the moment the board packet hit their inboxes, the widening eyes, the sudden silence, the instinctive understanding that something irreversible had just been placed in motion. They would see the timestamps first, then my signature, then the legal framework wrapping tightly around Junior's unauthorized decision like a closing fist. No panic on my part, no scrambling. The preparation had been done long before he ever recited that script, and as the building hummed with the same artificial calm it always carried, I finally felt the balance shift in my favor, subtle, undeniable, and already past the point of reversal. Junior thought he had ended something today, but all he had done was wake the machinery I built to protect this place from leaders exactly like him. Now the protocol was alive, the system was moving, and every document he signed would become another piece of evidence reinforcing the trap he triggered. I had barely made it halfway across the parking terrace when the first alert hit my phone like a punch to the sternum. At first, I thought it was just another automated status ping. Fortisphere sends dozens a day, but the tone was wrong. Sharper, urgent, the kind of alert that only fires when something inside the system is truly collapsing. I stopped walking, glanced at the screen, and felt the world jolt sideways. Critical breach detected, manual override required. The words flashed in red, pulsing so quickly they were almost vibrating. For a second, I wondered whether Junior had any idea what he had just stepped into. By 10:21 a.m., chaos wasn't approaching, it had arrived inside the building. I could already imagine the command center unraveling. When the system fails, it fails loudly, alarms chiming, dashboards freezing, engineers scrambling to understand what broke and how fast. And this time, everything was happening at once. Traffic spikes, dead nodes, customer transactions hanging mid-process. A zero-day vulnerability had slipped through the lattice of our AI defense shell, hitting the exact subsystem I had warned leadership about 5 times last quarter. I stood still, heart hammering with the shift from humiliation to raw, technical instinct. This wasn't just a breach, it was a structural emergency. My phone buzzed again, then nonstop. Through the glass wall of the lobby, I saw engineers sprinting across the floor, actual running, which only happens when the automated failsafes have stalled. Junior must have been in the middle of his victory lap when the dashboards went red. He would be shouting names now, demanding answers no one had, searching for someone who could explain why the system wasn't responding to AI-generated patches. Except there was one detail he couldn't possibly know: the subsystem infected by the breach couldn't be restored by AI. It required protocol Solaris 9, and Solaris 9 wasn't something anyone could Google. It wasn't in the manuals, it wasn't on the servers. It lived in one place: my head. Because I wrote it. A sudden flood of messages from the command center confirmed everything unraveling behind those walls. Hunter, do you have eyes on this? What is Solaris 9? He keeps asking. The AI shell won't respond. Everything's freezing. Please tell me you didn't leave yet. Each message layered on top of the next until my notification bar stopped scrolling. Amid the panic, one thing was clear: Junior was completely out of his depth. He could bluff his way through a board meeting, but he couldn't bluff through a zero-day breach chewing through our infrastructure like acid. A part of me wanted to walk away. Let the system prove the point I'd been making for years, that competence isn't optional in a company built on security. But instinct overrode pride. I turned back toward the building, pulse racing with the urgency of a man who knew exactly how fast this could go from bad to catastrophic. And as I pushed through the lobby doors, I understood the truth. The breach wasn't the disaster. Junior's ignorance was. I hadn't even reached the command floor when the atmosphere inside Fortisphere shifted from frantic to something far more dangerous: organized panic. You can always tell the difference. Chaos is loud, panic is quiet, calculated, and full of people pretending they aren't 5 seconds from losing control. From the hallway, I could see the boardroom lights flicker on one by one, assistants rushing with binders clutched to their chests, and executives moving in quick, clipped steps that betrayed their rising fear. Whatever was happening upstairs had escalated faster than even I expected. As I turned the corner, a senior analyst nearly collided with me, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. "The board is calling an emergency session," she blurted before rushing past. An emergency session at 10:30 in the morning meant one thing: the breach wasn't slowing down, and Junior had officially run out of excuses. I kept walking, tension tightening in my shoulders as the muffled echo of raised voices bled through the closed hallway doors. Something was unraveling inside that room, and everyone knew it, inside. The board members sat in a tight semicircle, each staring at a printed packet that looked heavier than any document I'd ever delivered. Their faces were stiff, drained, almost gray. The chairman, Harold Madsen, rubbed his temples like he was bracing for a migraine that hadn't fully arrived. The vice chair stood near the window, pacing in rigid lines. But it was the question I heard as the door cracked open that turned the tension into something closer to dread. How many shares does Hunter Reed actually hold? Silence fell so thick I felt it through the walls. That was the question that meant someone had finally read far enough into the documentation to understand the real stakes, and judging from the way voices dropped, they didn't like the answer. Across town, while I stood just outside the boardroom, CEO Landon Pierce Sr. was sitting in a quiet restaurant. Halfway through a business lunch he would never finish. Reports later said he opened the emergency packet from legal, skimmed the summary, reached the line authority revoked under 19K, and dropped his glass, shattering it across the tablecloth. His partner thought he was having a stroke. In a way, he was. There are shocks that hit the heart, and shocks that hit the legacy. This one hit both. Back in the boardroom, Harold finally spoke, voice tight and trembling at the edges. Without Hunter, Fortisphere loses $78 million an hour. The number hung in the air, obscene in its accuracy. A system-wide failure with no manual override had turned into a financial hemorrhage, and everyone in that room looked like they were watching the company bleed out in real time, someone whispered. "Get him back," someone else whispered. "He won't come." And for the first time all morning, the panic in their voices was unmistakable, not for the breach, but for the realization that the one person who could save them was the same man they allowed Junior to fire. By 3 o'clock sharp, the building's atmosphere had settled into a heavy, anticipatory quiet, the kind that follows chaos but comes just before a reckoning. I walked down the hallway toward the executive floor, my footsteps steady, controlled, almost too calm for everything that had unfolded since the morning. But that calm wasn't emptiness, it was precision. After years of cleaning up other people's fires, I finally understood which flames were worth walking through and which ones were worth letting burn. And this time, the flames weren't mine. When I pushed open the boardroom door, every conversation died instantly. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that stretches thin, sharp, and unmistakably respectful. They hadn't expected me to come walking in like this, composed, unhurried, and absolutely unshaken. Landon Pierce Jr. stood near the end of the table, frozen mid-sentence, color draining from his face as he looked at me like he'd seen a ghost from a chapter he didn't bother to read. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked straight to the table, placed a thick binder of documents down with a solid, final thud, and let the weight of it speak before I did. The board stared at the stack like it was a detonator. "These," I said evenly, "are the equity transactions you requested?" I opened the binder. Page after page of filings, timestamps, signatures, and acquisition slips stared back at them. Tiger Gain Capital, where I acquired my first significant block. A retired shareholder in Arizona who sold me her remaining stake during the second restructuring. The former CFO who liquidated his shares during his divorce settlement. And the quiet infrastructure buyout 7 rounds of restructuring the Pierce family never thought twice about each one shifting another percentage point into my hands. No one at the table moved. No one breathed. Finally, Harold, the board chair, found his voice. "Hunter, this is 71%. I met his eyes without flinching. "Correct." The room shifted not physically, but in hierarchy. For the first time today, the power dynamic snapped back into place, and everyone felt it at once. Even the sunlight pouring through the glass seemed to tilt toward my side of the table. Junior's voice cracked first. You can't be serious? Dad said Dad never mentioned that," I cut in, my tone still cold. "Is because none of you ever bothered to read the restructuring disclosures. You treated them like spare paperwork. I treated them like the foundation of a company worth protecting." He stared at me, stunned, helpless, and completely out of moves. And in that moment, the room stopped seeing me as the man who'd been fired at 9:42 a.m. They saw me as the man who owned the building they were standing in. The vote didn't begin with shouting or accusations. It began with a silence so heavy that even the air seemed to brace for impact. I stood at the end of the long glass table, the binder of my ownership documents still open in front of the board, while Landon Pierce Jr. hovered near the doorway like someone waiting for a verdict they already feared. My heartbeat was steady. Too steady. The kind of rhythm that comes only when a person has run out of tears, anger, and pride. All that was left was the truth, and the truth demanded an answer. Harold cleared his throat first, though his voice was hardly more than a whisper. "We need to proceed," he said, looking at each board member as though confirming they understood the gravity of what came next. They did. Every face had tightened into the same expression, part regret, part dread, part inevitability, even then. A small part of me wished the morning had unfolded differently, but a larger part knew this was the only direction it could go. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The documents had spoken for me, and the breach had done the rest. "The motion on the table," Harold continued, "is the revocation of Chief Executive Authority from Landon Pierce Jr., effective immediately. All those in favor raise your hand." For a second, no one moved. Then, one by one, hands lifted into the air, deliberate, heavy, final. The CFO, the vice chair, the legal counsel, the investor representative. No wavering, no hesitation, no pretending. Each vote felt like a stone being set into place. Junior's breath hitched audibly. He took a step forward, eyes shining, lower lip trembling. "You," he whispered. "You can't be serious. All of you, just like that." But the vote wasn't over. Everyone turned toward the far end of the table, where his father sat completely still, staring at the polished surface like it held every mistake he had made in raising a son inside a company instead of teaching him how to run one. The elder Pierce's shoulders sagged before he even lifted his gaze. "Dad," Junior whispered, voice cracked open, "please, I did all of this to prove myself. To you." A long, unbearable pause. Then Landon Pierce Sr. exhaled, a slow, breaking sound. His hand lifted, shaking visibly, and rose into the air. "Yes," he said softly. "I vote yes." Junior's face drained, then collapsed into something raw and childlike. "Dad, I did everything I could. I just wanted to show I could lead." Senior looked at him with sorrow instead of anger. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You acted without listening. You acted without learning." Harold nodded. Voice solemn. "The motion passes. Unanimous." The room seemed to release a breath all at once, a quiet, painful exhale that felt like both justice and heartbreak. And though I felt the weight finally lift off me, the victory didn't taste sweet. It tasted like loss. The moment the vote ended, the room didn't explode into noise the way you might expect. Instead, it settled into a dense, almost reverent quiet, like everyone understood that whatever came next had to happen slowly, deliberately, and without theatrics. I stayed where I was, hands resting lightly on the documents that had shifted the entire balance of power across from me. Junior remained motionless, caught between disbelief and the dawning horror of consequences he never saw coming. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Harold finally broke the silence. "Landon Jr., per the board's unanimous decision, your access and authority are suspended immediately." His tone was firm, but not cruel. It was the voice of someone who had warned a storm was coming and now had nothing left to do but watch it land. Junior blinked, as if those words were physically disorienting. "Suspended." "What does that mean?" he asked, voice cracking. "I'm still the CEO. I still have access. My badge." He stopped, because the badge clipped to his pocket flashed red. He pressed it against the boardroom door panel. It beeped, denied. The door didn't unlock. A soft electronic chime echoed through the room when I recognized instantly. It was the sound of the Sentinel access gate, a security layer I had built 15 years ago, a layer designed to freeze all credentials the moment a leadership suspension was triggered under 19TA. I'd created it in a dim, empty server room long before Junior ever imagined himself in a corner office. He pressed the badge again, harder. Another denial, another chime. The panic hit him, then real panic, the kind that turns the air thin and sharp. Why isn't it working? This is a mistake. Reset it. Someone reset it." No one moved. Harold nodded subtly to the security team waiting outside. 2 guards stepped in, calm and professional, neither gloating nor apologizing. "Sir, please follow us," one said. "Your clearance has been revoked. We'll escort you to the exit." Junior shook his head violently. "No, I'm not leaving through the main lobby. I'm the CEO. I belong. You're no longer the CEO," Harold corrected gently, "and you'll use the auxiliary exit, standard protocol." My chest tightened, not with pity, but with something deeper, heavier, because as the guards guided him toward the hallway, I remembered my own walk, just hours earlier. The humiliation, the sting, the unfairness. But there was one difference, a difference that mattered. I had a way back in. He did not. When they reached the elevator, his badge failed again. He tried to force the panel open, palms trembling, panic unraveling every trace of composure he'd carried in the morning. The system denied him every time, every beep echoing the same message: you shouldn't have touched what you didn't understand. Finally, the guards redirected him toward the side corridor, the same path I'd been forced through at 9:42 a.m. Except for him, it wasn't temporary. It was final. And as the heavy door shut behind him, I felt something unexpected settle over me, not triumph, not vengeance, but a quiet, resonant sense of balance finally restored. Walking back into Fortisphere's main lobby felt nothing like the walk I'd taken that morning. There was no sting beneath my ribs, no humiliation clinging to the back of my neck, only a quiet, rising certainty that the ground beneath my feet finally matched the years I had poured into this place. The lights seemed brighter, the air steadier, as if the building itself recognized me in a way it never had before. Maybe that was projection, or maybe it was the truth finally catching up with the structure I helped build. Either way, for the first time all day, I felt something ignite in my chest, freedom, sharp and clean. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and the sound hit me before the sight did. Applause, not scattered, not polite, but full, resonant, and startlingly genuine. The senior engineers stood first, followed by the infrastructure team, then the analysts, the technicians, the people who had watched me stay past midnight to patch vulnerabilities they didn't have clearance to see. These were the ones who had carried the weight of our system in silence right alongside me. Their faces weren't triumphant, they were relieved, seen, reassured. I walked through them slowly, steady as a metronome. I didn't wave, I didn't smile broadly, but something in my posture must have shifted, because I could feel the room exhale, as if collectively releasing a fear they'd been holding for months. And when I stepped into the boardroom, the vote happened in under 30 seconds. Unanimous, 8 hands rising with absolute clarity, 0 objections, 0 hesitation, just like that. The title I had never chased and never needed became mine. CEO of Fortisphere Data Networks. I didn't give a victory speech. I didn't talk about leadership, vision, or turning points. Those belonged to people who needed an audience. Instead, I walked to the head of the table, placed a single hand on the chair, and let the silence settle before speaking. "Let's get back to work," I said quietly. But this time, no one gets forgotten. That was it. A simple sentence for a company that had forgotten what grounded it in the first place. Around the table, heads nodded slowly at first. Then, with unmistakable conviction, even Landon Pierce Sr. held my gaze a second longer than usual, a tired acceptance settling across his face. He knew this was the only way forward. He knew his son's downfall wasn't a victory lap for me. It was the overdue correction of a course the company had been drifting from for years. As the boardroom emptied, I stood alone for a moment, letting everything land: the pain, the humiliation, the shock, the panic, the reversal, the justice. All of it had led here, and I finally allowed myself to breathe deeply, knowing the weight I carried was no longer invisible. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's simple: protecting what you build sometimes means standing up when others expect you to fall. And the people who underestimate you today might be the ones who depend on you tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. And if you felt the justice, the tension, or the triumph along the way, go ahead and like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps remind the world what real resilience looks like.